Hello again and welcome back to another recap video on the OCR B Geography GCSE. This week we're going to be focusing on the global hazards case studies. So my last video was about the content. This is about the two case studies that come up in the hazardous weather section of global hazards. So our two case studies that we're going to be looking at today are the UK drought in 2012 and Typhoon Haiyan in 2013 in the Philippines. So remember, for this part of the topic, remember in tectonics we looked at Nepal as our case study in 2015 earthquake, but in this hazardous weather section we have two. We have to have two contrasting hazardous weather events. One has to be based in the UK and one based outside of the UK, so non-UK based. So these are our two case studies as a final reminder. Now, if we think back to when we did our tectonics again, with those three key words or key phrases that we need to remember, that we need to know again for these case studies. And they are causes, consequences, which remember is the same as effects and impacts, and responses. So again, we need to be able to talk about what can be done to help reduce the impact of what was done afterwards to try and help people. So again, knowing these three terms is really crucial, because these are three terms that are likely to be used in your exam quite a lot, that you need to be able to know what they are asking for in the question. So as we go through, you may want to mind map your ideas, okay, pick out some key things. Here's an example mind map you can use. It's quite basic, you might want to draw it a little bit nicer than what I have, but it gives you a kind of some of the key phrases and keywords we want to be able to talk about throughout this topic. So if you want to pause this video, jot down, get a piece of paper to do a bit of a mind map, and then we can continue. So first up then, we're going to look at the Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. So this is our non-UK based. Now for our weather hazard, we need to either talk about either a tropical storm or a flood, and obviously this is a tropical storm. Okay, and typhoon is called Typhoon Haiyan because of where it happens. Okay, so in this area, okay, of the Western Pacific, they're known as typhoons. Okay, and affect places like the Philippines, Thailand, and obviously you can see China looking at the map as well. So, starting off then, our causes. So in terms of understanding about why we get tropical storms, okay, you need to understand about where do we find them, why do we get them there, okay, and also we need to think about the direction they might travel in as well. Now in the top right here, you can see a map showing you the different directions of tropical storm paths across the world. And if you look in the top right of the map, you can see where our typhoons are based. You can see they go north from the equator and start to spin, okay, in a kind of what we call counterclockwise direction, okay, heading north. As you can see in the south, it's the opposite. Now this is due to the Coriolis effect, and I encourage you to look at some videos about how do hurricanes and tropical storms, etc., form, linking to the Coriolis effect, because it's good worth knowing. Now in the picture you can see on the left hand side, then you can see the steps. Now what I would suggest to be doing is maybe doing a flow chart, picking out those key features about what happens. Now the first thing we need, okay, we need warm ocean temperatures. So over kind of about 26, 27 degrees. So that means that allows that evaporation to take place, which is going to cause air to rise. Now, if you remember back to our previous lessons where we've looked at kind of what happens when air rises then, okay, we get that low pressure at the bottom. So the air rises, creates this low pressure. And a tropical storm is called a low pressure weather system, is formed because of a low pressure for a low pressure zone. Okay, so winds come across, force that air upwards, okay, and as it goes upwards, it starts to spin. So you can see now, as that air rises, it starts to cool as well, and it creates that rainfall. Those clouds start to form, that condensation, okay, which starts to form a storm. Now, as we've got this circling movement then of wind, where air's rushing in to feel that low pressure at the bottom, and these winds keep spinning against each other, okay, all trying to get to that central point. And this starts that spinning formation, and as these different storms collide, they create a larger tropical storm. Alright, now again, wind speeds have to be over 76 miles an hour to be able to class as a tropical storm. Remember, there's 5 categories. Now, Typhoon Haiyan was a category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale tropical storm, so the highest you can get. And you can see we have some really warm ocean temperatures, okay, in this area. So this is why we only find them generally close to the equator, because of the warm oceans that we need. And remember, in the centre then we have this eye, this central circle, where you can see where the wind speeds are generally on the edge of the eye, where they're strongest, whereas actually the eye itself is actually very calm. So this spinning, all this spinning going around it, creates a lot of carnage, okay, lots of destruction, whereas actually the eye is really, really calm. Now we can see for the final picture there, the path taken then, you can see how it travelled then across, went through pretty much the centre of the Philippines and creating lots of damage. And it was a massively wide tropical storm, I think it was something like 300 miles wide. So it was going to damage a lot of places. As you can see, as it continued, it then went and affected other parts of Asia as well. Now remember, the Philippines is made up of lots of islands. So when normally, as soon as a hurricane or tropical storm or typhoon, etc., hits land, it normally starts to lose its energy because there's no warm water to suck up to give it the energy. But because the Philippines is made up of lots of little islands, then the chances of it slowing down is reduced. So it may have slowed down a little, but not enough. So it tore through Philippines, causing lots of damage. However, the East Coast was probably one of the most places affected because that's when it was at its strongest. So as we move on then, we can talk about some consequences. Now remember, you need to know a mixture of social, environmental and economic consequences from the disaster. So using here, you can see some facts. Now you obviously want to do your own research as well, check your facts, use your knowledge organisers and your case study booklets and things to help you with that as well. But here's some good ideas of things you can talk about. So the number of deaths, okay. It's got some extra information here about the evacuation centre setup, how many homes were damaged. So you've got a variety of different information you can use. Try and bring in that place detail, remember, to get onto those higher marks. On the right hand side there, you can see 8 people died in Tacloban when a wall collapsed in a rice warehouse after the people raided it for food. So you know that's a kind of a slightly different impact there, but again some really good place specific detail. So try and use some of these consequences. You might want to pause now, try and pick them out and think about which ones are social and economic, which ones are environmental, and think about any others that you might know. Finally then, we can talk about this word responses then. So what do people do? Remember, we use this word mitigation as well at times. The idea of reducing the impact, what can be done to reduce the impact, and understanding that word mitigation is important. So now, some of this then would be completed by some of you, but not all. So you need to think about this as a real high level, more kind of evaluated task. How much can you plan for a disaster like this? Now, Typhoon Haiyan was one of the most powerful storms ever to hit land. How much can the government plan for that if they don't know actually how strong it's going to be? Now, there was a lot of criticism of the government for this because some people thought that it wasn't going to be as bad as it was. They get tropical storms quite a lot in the Philippines. So when they kind of went around and told people to evacuate and things like that, people didn't take them seriously enough. Now, when you get a tropical storm, it creates this kind of storm surge, really high waves that push against, because of the strong winds, cause these large waves that come in and flood the land. Now, lots of people didn't really understand what a storm surge was. They hadn't seen kind of waves that high before. And so many people just ignored them and thought, yeah, okay, it's going to be a bit windy and wet, but we'll be okay. Now, if lots of people said that if we knew it was like a tsunami wave, which obviously is caused by earthquakes, then we would have listened, because then we would have evacuated. But lots of people didn't know what a storm surge was, and so loads of people didn't evacuate, and then that led to more deaths. So there's lots of things to consider when you talk about these responses. Now, lots of countries helped, okay, in the relief efforts to try and help the people. Now, in the UK, they donated around $16 million, so about £10 million to help. And here you can see here from this little picture, you can see some of the examples of some of the things that it did to help. Okay, so sending some ships and some planes to help try and get aid to people. Obviously things like shelter, food was really important for these people. Lots of water would have been contaminated by the flood waters, so being able to try and get water, clean water and water purification tablets to people would have been really important. Now, one of the UK charities, so a UK charity that helped in the response to this was Shelterbox, and there's some really good articles about Shelterbox and some videos online for you to look into. Now, Shelterbox are a charity that basically create these bespoke boxes for things depending on the disaster around the world. They can send these out to people. Now, there's some criticism about these, that not enough then, okay, was sent out. I think only roughly about 1,000 boxes were sent out to the Philippines. However, you've got to remember, trying getting all these equipment together is not easy. However, obviously there was a lot more people affected, than just the thousands that are sent out. But again, this still would have been very useful to lots of families. So look at some of the items you can see there and think about why they would have been important for those particular people in the Typhoon Haiyan disaster. So a few other charities also involved. So Red Cross, obviously, are an international charity, okay, working across in different worlds. Now they give people some advice about what to do. So obviously, unlike an earthquake, you can actually kind of track it and know when it's going to hit a little bit more than obviously earthquakes. So people can be kind of prepare for it, you know. So making sure that you've checked your house. Can you kind of future-proof, kind of make sure that your area is going to be safe. But after the disaster as well, you can see the second bullet point there. It says, beware of dangerous animals such as snakes that might have entered the house. Remember, the Philippines is an EDC country, a relatively, you know, not LIDC, but still a relatively poor country. So lots of people are not going to have well-structured homes and things like that. So you're going to be loads of people at risk of those kind of dangerous animals being in buildings that obviously could cause extra issues for people. Electric cables might have fallen. So again, water could be electrically charged, which could be very obviously dangerous for people. So these are also responses that we can talk about. And like I was started to say before, some future responses. What can they do to try and reduce the impacts afterwards, okay, by preparing for the storm? So being more proactive rather than reactive to the disaster. So again, you may want to pause and note down some of these ideas. So moving on to our second case study then, we're now talking about the UK drought in that kind of lasted between 2010 and 2012. The effects mainly felt in kind of towards the end of 2011 and into 2012. So to start off, we need to look at use a bit of map data. Now from the map you can see here, it shows you the average rain, the amount of rainfall that fell during the period from November 2010 to February 2012, and well, the percentage of the average that it would normally get. Now you can see in many places towards the south and the southeast and the central regions received less than kind of 75% of their normal rainfall that they would normally find during that period of time. So lots of areas are getting a lot less water than normally expected, which can have a massive impact on the economy, the type of farming people do, okay, how easy it is to kind of get crops, but also water as well. Now the other thing we might want to think about here is actually, where do people live in the UK? Most people live towards the south and the east. So we've got the kind of a real concentration of people using water, plus an area that's getting a lot less water. You can see areas in Scotland actually were getting this normal amount, if not more. So they were okay. But in the south, it was a big problem. Now this is kind of backed up then from this graph that shows you the months over the year and which months received more rainfall and less rainfall. Now as we kind of got into 2012, obviously we had a long period with many months getting below amounts of rainfall. Now we'll talk about some of the other effects that this would have had on the ground and things like that, but consider what happened then in 2012 towards the middle of the year. These months then got loads of rainfall, but in the lead up, loads of months without any rainfall. So we actually ended up with some quite severe floods in 2012 as well, because the ground was so dry it couldn't absorb the water, it was so too hard to absorb any of the water. So rivers were overwhelmed then by the amount of water coming in, so it was entering the rivers so quickly, which led to floods. But in the lead up to that, you can see many months without the rainfall. So other things, we obviously had warmer temperatures. This led to greater evaporation rates, so reservoirs started to lose more water. Dry soil, as mentioned before, so even when the rain did fall in certain months, it didn't soak in. So it meant that the ground that needs the water to help grow the crops, there was no groundwater to help store and help constantly give water supply. The water just went straight off the ground into the rivers. So the ground still deep inside the ground was still really dry. So big problems. And finally then, usage of water in the UK. Lots of water is wasted in the UK. 1.7 billion litres of water are used every day in the UK. You know, think about how much you waste at home. Do you leave the tap running when you brush your teeth? Don't. Turn the tap off. Save water. So think about other ways you use water during the day and how you could try and reduce it. Now, leading on to the consequences then, okay, was kind of three key consequences we want to talk about. And you might want to go and do some extra research about some more place-specific detail from this, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview. So problems for farmers. We've already mentioned the ground was very dry. This is going to be making it very hard to grow crops. So harvest, for example, in 2011, the time of year when they collect all the crops up for cattle and for obviously crops to go in the supermarkets, lots of things hadn't grown properly. The yields, which is the amount of food and production of crops, was really low. So this then actually led to an increase of food prices in supermarkets as well, because there wasn't enough supply for the demand. So again, this can cause greater problems as well. Environmental damages, wildfires, things that we associate in the news to do with the Amazon rainforest more recently, and droughts, and obviously problems in California and Australia. But actually we had wildfires in the UK as well because of the dry conditions. Places like South Wales really suffered with lots of wildfires. I think there was a story as well of a cemetery being taken over by wildfires in one part of the UK as well. So think about some of those things, the big impact. The other things is that water from rivers had to be pumped into reservoirs to ensure there was enough water for certain areas for people. But this obviously would then have a knock-on impact on the environment, because then rivers would be low, fish that might migrate upstream, like things like salmon, couldn't do so because the river levels were so low. So the knock-on impact on plants and the animals by pumping water out of the rivers could also be discussed. And the final one, the one that people tend to remember the most actually, is the restrictions in homes. 20 million people in the UK were given a hosepipe ban, and there was a £1,000 fine for people who kind of used their hosepipes without reason. Now there was a list of conditions for this, so obviously companies that need to use hosepipes as part of their jobs, like car washing companies, gardeners, things like that, was okay, but it was more private use. So things like encouraging people to use watering cans and things like that to reduce the water use had to be in place. The other thing was lots of water companies sent out texts and emails to customers, remind them about water use and how to conserve water. Some companies like Severn Trent sent out little sand timers that people could have on in their showers and time people in the shower, trying to encourage people to use 4-minute showers. Now, obviously the fines and the 4-minute showers are great ideas and really good at trying to consume and reduce the use of water. But if we're going to start to evaluate some of these kind of consequences, but also you can use these as responses, actually how do you police that? How do you police telling people how to use their shower and how long to use their shower? Okay, it's very difficult. However, if it gets more people to consider the idea and think about it, it's obviously going to have its benefits. So that leads us nicely then into the responses. So look at the images on the slide here. Can you think about some of the ways that we can also try and reduce the amount of water we use? So watering plants at night, so reduce the evaporation. Toilet flushes, having a smaller flush for certain uses of the toilet. Having energy efficient washing machines or dishwashers, obviously going to reduce the amount of water. One of the big things is leaks. Now, not only obviously making sure that you turn taps off properly and things like that to stop drips of water, but actually big water companies more recently actually have focused on trying to fix leaks in pipes underneath the ground. So really trying to reduce the amount of water lost through leakage. And this can make a massive difference. This is something that they control a lot greater than actually how much water is being used by people. Now, the government did put a few things in place, so permits for certain water companies to allow them to pump water, like we said, from rivers into their reservoirs so there was enough. So Southern Water applied for a drought permit to help refill Beale Reservoir in the southeast. And obviously this is an area which has got a lot of high density of people, so really important to have enough water. And also Anglican Water were also allowed to do this as well. So making sure you know some examples of these companies and what they did is really useful. So to finish off today then, you've got obviously as always some exam questions. Now one of the things I'm noticing from some students, they're getting their case studies mixed up. So just as a real check question really to make sure that you are reading questions properly. I've got you two very similar questions here. Okay, the wording is very similar, and you need to make sure that you send me your exam questions with the right case studies and information. So read the questions carefully. Remember, bug your questions, break it down, make sure you talk about the right case study. This is so important because it can cost you lots of marks if you write about the wrong case study. So please read these 2 questions carefully. Now, on this slide then, you can see 2 longer questions. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do question 3C because I've given you a model answer there, but you are going to complete 3D. But let's have a look at 3C to start off with. Discuss to what extent the consequences of your non-UK based hazard weather event were more serious than your UK based weather event. So if we look at this answer, it's 6 marks, so we know we're going to have to do 2 PL paragraphs. We know we need to make sure that because it's case study based question, we've got to get some case study detail in there. Now, and because it's a to what extent and discuss question, we've got to show kind of a comparison between the 2. And if we look at any other of those words in there, which event was more serious, again, it tells us that we've got to put some level of comparison to show that. Which one was the more serious? We need to say that in our answer. So if we have a look at this answer, Typhoon Haiyan was far more serious than the UK 2010-12 drought. So straight away, my first answer, I've named my 2 case studies and I've put that phrase far more serious, which shows I'm talking to the what extent bit, and I'm showing how that it was more serious. Evidence is that 190-mile-an-hour winds and a 6-metre storm surge killed over 6,000 people. In contrast, the impact on the UK was 20 million people had hosepipe bans, which is comparatively much minor consequence. So there I'm showing why is it then that the UK is not as serious as Typhoon Haiyan. Well, the hosepipe ban is not a life-threatening thing. 6,000 people lost their lives in Typhoon Haiyan. Shows it's a lot more of a serious event. Furthermore, in the Philippines, thousands of homes were destroyed by the storm, and the impacts were felt over many years, costing $2.8 billion. In contrast, the UK hazard did lead to food shortages for bread, and some wildfires occurred due to the land becoming dry. However, these impacts were much smaller than the Philippines. Again, we're talking about billions of dollars worth of damage in the Philippines, whereas in the UK we're talking about a few food shortages. Okay, some wildfires that, okay, would have caused damage and yes, I'm sure caused problems for people, but again, not to the same level as we did in the Philippines. So being able to do that comparison is a really useful skill. Now finally then, obviously question 3D is what I want you to attempt. Evaluate the effectiveness of the responses to the non-UK hazardous weather events you have named above, so on the previous slide. So remember, non-UK hazardous weather event. That is telling you need to be talking about Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. So make sure that you make that as your focus for that exam answer. So finally, reminder then of what needs to be completed this week. So obviously complete those 3 exam questions that you've seen on the last 2 slides. Remember, you're going to have your hazardous weather case study quiz on Show My Homework to complete. Make sure you've completed all the other quizzes as well. There's also, remember, a hazardous weather GCSE pod assignment, and please make sure you're going over those assignments because they're really useful and they give you some really good videos on all the things I've been talking about in much more detail than I can in a short YouTube video. So please make sure you're watching those videos. I think there definitely is one on Typhoon Haiyan on GCSE pod, so please watch it, it'd be really useful. And then there's a few extra kind of revision tasks you can do there as well. As always, email me if you've got any questions. Okay, keep it up, you're working really well. Okay, hopefully see you soon.